Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded here at the Memphis Listening Lab at the Crosstown Concourse. Today is Wednesday, March 19th. It's around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm here with Andrea Morales, who is made time in the very busy schedule. Andrea, on the website, will have like a little bio that you can send me, and I'll put it on there, and that way everybody can kind of look at it and go, oh, I see, photojournalist, photo shows at Brooks, that kind of thing. But if it's okay with you, let's just hop right in. So usually the question I start with is, what's your earliest memory of art? And that can be in the most broadest terms in terms of thinking about art.
Yeah, I think that I've tried to look back at my life with the relearning, the lens of relearning that I've sort of carried for the last 10 years, the relearning of like what is high art and what is like valuable and, all these kind of value judgments. But in thinking about this question, the first thing that comes to mind is just like totally like mainstream art moment was like watching or going on a school field trip to the Miami Art Museum and seeing Annie Leibowitz's photos at large scale.
Wait, when was this?
I was in high school, so it was like 1999, 2000, maybe.
Whoa, most people are like, I kind of made some drawings, my mom sewed things. So you went to go see this Annie Leibovitz show in Miami. Good Lord, break that open. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been kind of like a artsy kid, I liked crafting, I liked coloring, drawing, sure. But I think that give my art form today, I feel like is like storytelling. And did this person knock? Sorry.
Oh no, I think it was just my glasses.
Oh, okay, sorry. Someone looked over also. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. That's of okay. Course.
Annie Leibovitz.
Yes.
And storytelling.
Oh yeah. So storytelling is like I feel like what my current like main form of art is, and so using that to like look back, I feel like storytelling had been something that was like very much happening in my household. I'm an immigrant. My parents and I moved here from Peru in 1989, and when we did, we couldn't bring very much. So you bring with you a lot of memories, a lot of stories. I grew up with my Peruvian family in some imaginary space to some degree, right? Because it was all memory and storytelling that were like the instruments to keep us bound together across distance. So when I am in high school, I'm like starting to get interested in writing and storytelling and wanting to be kind of like a famous writer of some kind. And I really struggled with just really being confident in my English. I grew up speaking both Spanish and English, and in Miami, there's a functioning, like patois Spanglish thing happening, and so I feel like that's what my language growing up was, and this is all leading toward the end of high school when I'm thinking about what I want to go do after I graduate. And like, there was no way I could leave home and do anything else other than go to college. Like if I wanted to leave home at all, this was going to be the way.
Now, just to back up just a second, I don't want to derail you, but so you immigrated here from Peru.
Yes.
How old were you when you immigrated?
I was 4.
Okay, wow,
Yeah.
So super, super early. And then how many members of your family also immigrated?
It was my parents, and I'm the oldest of 3 sisters. And so it was myself and my middle sister.
Okay. And then what about your folks? What did they do?
My folks, we were undocumented for a minute. We moved in '89. We didn't get our green cards until 2000, not 2000, sorry, 1997. Yeah, 1997. And then, so they had all manner of things. They had somewhat professional lives back in Peru, but they came here, and I feel like they worked. My earliest memory of their job was like them working at this like shrimp dock of some kind. I don't know, doing some like shrimp processing. And my dad was a janitor, my mom was a nanny. They did a bunch of different random things until we finally got our papers together. We were granted asylum in this like way that feels so surreal now, given everything that's happening in this moment in 2025. But yeah, we were granted political asylum, and then after that, my dad got into laser printer, toner, recycling. That was his ministry for like a solid 15 years. Very niche. Kind of collapsed with the fact that like now we're like largely digital. And my mother has been working for American Airlines for an insane amount of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you were mentioning storytelling. I'm curious, what form did that take in terms of thinking about your childhood?
Yeah, I feel like, all the questions that come up in those formative years around identity, who am I, what do I mean to people, all of that had to be, like in terms of my family structure, had to be told to me. You know what I mean? In addition, like, so that I could try to live it when I was with my family, which was when we left '89. I didn't go back and visit until I was 17. So it was a while. So like the storytelling was like almost like the place where we lived. I also, when my parents really started working a lot, like I was at home with my books, with my television. Like I was babysitting at 8 years old. So stories were also like my companion. I was just like really, really fascinated about like their ability to take you somewhere,
Now, were you a big reader?
Yeah.
And then what kind of things, like in terms of thinking about your childhood, are there particular books that were important?
Yes. I need to go back and reread this because I had a conversation with a friend recently, but I really loved The Boxcar Children. And these were kids who like lived on their own. Their parents were orphaned by they were orphaned by some tragic circumstance, and they moved into this like little train boxcar, and they found a way to make life work. Like they would scrape together bits and bobs to create their space that resembled what they had once upon a time. I don't know. I was really into that. I felt like it was like tapped into some idea of like an abundance that was like inherent to us. Yeah. Well, and so like now I'm not even I'm doing a great job derailing myself, but
I'm totally okay with that.
but strangely enough, Boxcar Children, Land of Abundance reminds me of Annie Leibovitz. You know what I mean? Okay, so you don't know what I mean. Let me explain it to you.
Tell me.
So Annie Leibovitz, has this storied career, and in the '90s, between all of her like Vogue portfolios and things, she put out, I think it was a portrait retrospective, and the prints were enormous for these portraits. These were like, I mean, in my memory, I was a very small high schooler, but in my memory, like these were huge. They were looming. They created such, I don't know, like presence for a person, their story, what they're willing to share. All these things just surface, and plus the scale of it. Yeah, it just is all tied. It harkens back to this idea of like we have sometimes it's like if we have everything we need, within us. There's this belief in abundance in like our will or our humanity or something, our desire to be connected.
I like all that. I mean, to me, that sounds really great. I love how usually people will say the show was really great, and then I'll be like, "Well, how come it was great?" But you totally cracked that open. That was really beautiful. I love the way you talked about it. I'm curious, were photos? I mean, here you are. You're in high school. You go see this show. Were photos on your radar at all? Like in general, like you were talking about Vogue and those things where
Yeah,
Annie Leibovitz is usually known. Was that on your radar at all?
not really. We were an encyclopedia set family, so of course we were also a National Geographic family. Like my dad had a National Geographic subscription for years in a way that I do not understand. Like, because they would just he would buy a shelf just for all the issues, but they would just like sit there. I don't know. Neurodivergence is very much in my family, but so I engage with photography in that sense. You know, that's like a very heavily visual publication. Obviously, like a certain gold standard I know now, like for like documentary photography. So I was exposed in that sense, but you know, I didn't have access to a camera growing up. When my mom worked at the airport in Miami and ended up scoring this tiny digital camera from Lost and Found in like 1996, or no, no, way later than that. It was like I was in high school, so it was must have been 2000, 2001 around then, and yeah, and that was like my first camera, but it was only used under supervision. You know, I like took a point and shoot film camera one time to school to like take pictures of my friends, right? Because that was what I loved to do in school. I loved taking pictures of my friends, and um, and just for I don't even know why, but yeah, I dropped this camera and it like I remember it bouncing. It was like I was at the back of the auditorium and it just like bounced and slid all the way to the front. So I got very limited camera privileges growing up, but then I did squeeze into journalism. I'm sorry, not journalism. I squeezed into the yearbook my senior year of school, and volunteered to do like all the club photos, and use that camera a lot. That was like maybe I had that camera for like 3 weeks, and I just remember being like, "Dah!"
Now, okay, there's a ton of stuff in there. So the National Geographic, as you said that, my brain was like, duh, of course. I'm curious, like, I mean, like you were saying a little bit earlier, is that us being at our age, we're able to sort of think about the things that we've seen and experienced in a way that we sort of understand in a way that we maybe did not then. But I'm curious, like, thinking about that, I mean, good Lord. I mean, that was like a master class in terms of thinking about imagery and then also in terms of thinking about how photos tell stories. I'm curious, are there any things that sort of, are there things that sort of stick out in terms of thinking about those National Geographics?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like flipping through those, you know, we especially when we were undocumented, you know, we couldn't really travel, and then even when we did manage to secure asylum and then get our green cards, we didn't really have money, so we weren't doing much traveling. You know, maybe we'd drive up to Orlando, but because I came from somewhere else so far away, I had a sense of like the expanse of the world, and like very very broad vague sense. And so there's just always been this kind of like yearning curiosity, and National Geographic definitely has got me into like documentary visuals. Like I really started to enjoy documentaries like when I was in high school. I think a lot of that was because of just the way that they did what they did, but at the same time, that's a double-edged sword. You know, that National Geographic, for all of its like notoriety and storied, you know, work and reputation, is also the work of like colonizers. Obviously, today we don't have like guys who are active colonizers working for National Geographic, and they're, you know, remedying what they can in the ways they can. But at the same time, that kind of level of photography was definitely what was held up as the model when I was in college, which was then like my first like formal interaction with photography. And so that had me over centering a certain kind of gaze, as like what was required for successful photography, you know.
Okay, another thing to back up to. So you were saying that for a while you guys lived as undocumented people, and I, as a Hamlet, head cis white guy born here, don't know anything about that. I'm curious. I mean, I would imagine that that would be a particularly stressful and particularly scary in some ways. I'm curious, like in terms of how you think about those times. How do you wrap your head around that now as a grown up here?
Yeah. I used to not really include it in part of my story, you know, because that part was, I don't know, it was, I feel like I'm going to air out all of my family's like psychological trauma, but it's just, yeah, we had to like, I mean, obviously I was like, this is from when I was like 4 till I was 13, you know, 7 years in which I was basically still like mostly like goo that is about to turn into bone. So all that considered, you know, I think that what I've carried from that time, as I've like processed with, you know, over memory and conversations with my family, is that like we were playing it very cool. I will say it's very, like I said earlier, it's very, very different than it was today. Like it definitely, I think, was objectively scary. And I know stories from that time, from that same time, that like where people were experiencing a lot of anxiety and urgency, but we had landed in like a pretty immigrant community, you know, granted, very distinct immigrant community. Miami in the 90s was totally ruled by Cubans, and largely Cubans who had migrated to Miami after the communist revolution there, right? So they were definitely more conservative, more moneyed, but my godfather from back in Peru was married to a Cuban woman. And anyway, we fell in with some Cuban folks. And so I feel like I had a very protected childhood in that sense, against all of those kind of vulnerabilities that are real when it comes to being undocumented. You know, we were definitely not the only ones around, you know, that didn't have papers. So yeah, I do think that like to some degree, like we were like laying so low that like I feel like my parents like wanted to like allowed assimilation to really take over our family in a way. And not, and I said that they allowed it. They thought they did what they thought they had to do for us, right? But yeah, I feel like there was a bit of like a distance between like the life that we left, who I thought was like a big part of me, and the life that we were supposed to be living here. And I couldn't quite figure out how to make it. I feel like my parents just were so caught up in keeping us safe, keeping food on the table, all that, you know, to be able to guide us through that.
And then, okay, thank you for unpacking that. I appreciate that. It really helps. Now, one thing that you mentioned was that tragic event with the point and shoot camera. And you were saying, I wanted to take it to school, wanted to take pictures of my friends, and then you were like, whatever. But talk to me about that a little bit, because that, I mean, I know that that's a common thing. Duh, it's 2025 and we all have pictures of our friends on our phones. But I'm curious, how did that work for you in terms of thinking about the photography and being behind the camera and all of that?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I had like, you know, like a lot of older millennials, like just mad anxiety as a kid, you know, because I was not enough of this, that, or the other. And so I felt really kind of safe and appreciated behind the camera as a kid. I like look back, especially like, you know, I've like looked back at some of my old scrapbooks and slam books that I kept with pals, and it's just like all these photos that my parents paid so much money to process. This film of like me and like that girl from 7th period. Like, and actually I wasn't in a lot of photos. I definitely liked taking the photos more than I did being in the photos, you know, probably for reasons both tied to my affinity and to my anxiety. But yeah, I like look back at those things and I'm just like, wow, I don't use photography like that anymore, right? Like photos for me were also just like a record that I referred to when I thought about my life that we left, and so there was also this kind of like acute sense of like time and loss, that I think I was probably trying to get a handle on there.
Now, back to the Annie Leibovitz show. So you see this show. Were people around you, were your classmates that went on this field trip with you, were any of them also affected in this way, or were you just sort of the lone weirdo with this light shining on you?
That's a good question. In my memory of that like day and that experience, I'm extremely by myself the whole time. You know what I mean? Like I was really into it. I had never seen anything like that. Just like regular people, because it wasn't even celebrities or all celebrities. I think there was regular people in the mix. Yeah, I feel like Richard Avedon maybe also had some images in the same show.
Okay.
I should go back and try to find it.
I'll Google it and then I'll like put it in the show notes. Now, okay, so thinking about that, where were you in high school in terms of time? Early, late?
I think I was probably a junior, so that would have been like 2001.
Okay, and then you start taking the pictures as a volunteer in your senior year. I'm curious, what was that like?
So that I had a DSLR, like a film DSLR. So I was like feeling myself, like moving the lens back and forth a bunch for no reason, holding the camera diagonally for art. It was just fun. It was so fun. And it felt, I don't know, even though there was like a roll of film in there, which, has limited exposures in it, it felt, thinking back on it, it really felt like this like very magical tool that I could use to make these kind of like very distinct memories. Yeah, it was pretty exciting, but I still wasn't totally sold on photography. I like went to school and wanted to go into journalism thinking that maybe like my English would fare better in that kind of space. And I walked in and found they were like giving touring students, presentations on the different concentrations and focuses. And I walked into the photojournalism presentation, and it was a photographer. I went to school at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and at the time there were two professors that were teaching there, and they were both named John. They're both white men. One of the Johns was giving this presentation that day that I was doing the tour, and he had photographed for National Geographic. So he was just showing these like photos of Tibetan monks like up close, and Peruvian, Andean women. And I was feeling both like excited about this opportunity to study with him. And he was at the time also promoting this program he did, which was like basically like National Geographic Junior, where you would spend a semester studying a country and finding a story within this community that we would be, visiting at the end of the semester. And then over 2 weeks, you'd produce that story. So I was very excited by that because I was like, it's going to be like National Geographic. And that's kind of where I started going more, intentionally toward photography.
Now, what was the school like? I mean, I don't know anything about Gainesville and University of Florida. Was it a big journalism program?
Definitely. This was also, early 2000s, so very much like post Sex and the City. And like I would just have to say that's what it was like. It was like a bunch of like aspiring Carrie Bradshaws and Samanthas, because the journalism school also contained the PR marketing.
Okay.
So it was journalism and communications. And so all of our, like my first 2 years of classes, it was like, a bunch of big intro classes with people all in the college. And yeah, it was a lot of girls ready to do marketing. And then a lot of dudes who wanted to shoot sports, to photograph sports.
I mean, it's funny because like I think just before I came in, I was looking at the machine, and it was telling me about the Scully effect and how like after X-Files, all of these women went into steam, all this kind of thing, and then of course we know about fashion by Project Runway, and then after Project Runway there was this huge upsurgence, but I had no idea that there was a huge Sex and the City uptick in journalism schools.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, this is a theory I'm confident in.
I'm totally okay with
But
you
I have
putting
not-
that out there. We haven't
it's
done
not
the
quantified.
actual research. Now, so it sounds like a lot of the people when you first entered the program weren't necessarily like you in terms of their dedication or in terms of their interests. How are you finding your cohort? How are you finding that college experience?
Yeah, I did not have a ton of that going into school. I was very fortunate. I think I needed this more than I realized, but I went with a bunch of pals from high school, also went to the University of Florida, and so we all kind of like hung out really tight together for those first 2 years. We were all like immigrant kids, just like away from home, but like a little scared and definitely underprepared. So those first 2 years were just so much about surviving, like making a ton of mistakes, like learning how to use money, because like I had no idea how to do that. I'm still struggling, but like, yeah, there was a lot of things that happened in those first 2 years that also just did not let me focus on photography. And I, being like a really good student, like a curse, was not doing great in some of my intro to photography classes either, and I wasn't finding my cohort just yet. The intro classes were also big and kind of mixed. And I also did not have like access to equipment. Our school didn't have a rental locker, strangely. So I had to do what I could. So my dad had gotten me a Minolta DSLR that I was shooting slide film on, and the Minolta, I ended up buying some like lens on eBay for a zoom lens on eBay because I had to do a sports assignment, and I was like, oh, like there's nothing in me that wants to do sports in the future, but we have to do it. So I bought this cheap lens, and like I basically failed that assignment because my lens was too cheap. The image quality was crap. I didn't know what I was doing. It was lacrosse, which I'd only seen, I guess, right in that moment. I'd never seen lacrosse before. I had no idea what I was doing. But
no, you were saying you were having trouble in those early classes. Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that you were exposed to in terms of other photographers? Were there, because I know that sometimes the stuff that we're exposed to, is both technical and then also trying to make a good image. But then also you're being exposed to lots of things. You mentioned John and the National Geographic images. What other kinds of things were you being exposed to?
Yeah, that was like it was just like a different time in journalism and academia. So there was a lot of people who were saying like, here's the formula for how you do journalism. This is what you need for your portfolio. You need a feature image, which is like a human interest photograph. You need a portrait. You need a lit portrait. You need a sports feature. You need a sports action photo. You need breaking news, and you need spot news, and that's a perfect portfolio. That was like kind of like a familiar and helpful framework at first, but then I was like, I can't do all of these. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still so nervous to show up in places that I've never been before. So there was a lot of pressure to produce, and I felt like I was struggling to produce because I was clinging to my hometown friends, to my Miami friends, and I was also like not feeling like I had what it took to, financially or like confidence wise, to even fulfill the assignments. I didn't fail any classes, but in my mind I basically like bombed.
Now, what about your other classes? Were you finding things that were interesting we always have to take those general education courses. Were any of those interesting, or did any other sparks fly there?
Sociology I thought was really interesting, and art history. So like I found myself like really starting to want to nurture like an artistic side again, and I wanted to definitely art history was really cool. I just hadn't learned a lot about like just canon painters and things like that. There was a lot of things I didn't know. So it was really cool to like be kind of equipped with some of that knowledge. And sociology was just like helpful. Oh, I was also minoring in Latin American studies, and that was actually huge for me. Like that was like a around this time is like when I say I've gotten radicalized, when I got radicalized, because I was learning a lot. I was taking, half of my semester was Latin American studies classes, half of it was journalism. And I had a lot of great professors that talked a lot about the military dictatorships that had just ended. It had been like 30 years since, not even, maybe less than that, since Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, all of those countries had military dictatorships during like the 60s and 70s. And so they were unpacking all this, and I was recognizing like first this country's role in all of it, like which had never been illuminated to me before. You know what I mean? I thought we had to make this country happy. And like all those classes and those like sociological seminars were so helpful for me, and just getting like a bigger framework of the interconnectedness of systems and power, and it made me feel very like call to action. That was also the year that I found out about Palestine and Israel through a on-campus group, and there was a group that honored the Nakba 48 in terms of like the displacement of Palestinians. And when I found out what was happening in Palestine, what Israel is doing in Palestine, and what the United States is doing to support that, it like broke my brain open.
Now, okay, there's a ton of stuff to crack open there. So one thing I'm curious about, and you mentioned Israel and Palestine, for me, that is one of those subjects that is so layered, so complicated, so many shades of gray. And one of the things I always think about is how difficult it is to enter that conversation, or how difficult it is to just get footing to have that conversation. I'm curious, for you, how did you approach it, and then what were some avenues? P.S. We're totally diverging, but I'm totally happy with this. But what were some of the ways that you maybe went about understanding what the hell was going on?
Yeah, I had talked, there was actions on campus and the quad, before, oh my gosh, this is going to sound like a time capsule compared to Florida right now. Because like the same place where I met this group is like the same place that's been like totally attacked by like the system of trustees or whatever to try to limit, disruptive action. But anyway, yeah, I'd like run into them, and I was in the middle of these stories about cycles of extraction and exploitation that were happening in Latin America, and how narrative and money are in like just heinous allegiance, I definitely, I wouldn't say that I was like the most nuanced 21-year-old, but I couldn't help but see a profound connection in the histories of the countries that I'd been studying, the country that I came from, and the reality, the contemporary realities of Palestine. It was, it's just as easy. I mean, I grew up, with a lot of Jewish people. Miami is no stranger to the chosen people. We love them. I would have almost like no teeth if it wasn't for the fact that my mom nannied for a Jewish dentist for years. So it isn't like a matter of like, for me, looking at Israel, the state of Israel, or Jewish people with any kind of disdain. It's more of like looking at the displacement of people from their homeland and being like, that's actually not acceptable.
It's really interesting that you said that. I mean, I came at it from sort of a different angle. Most of my angle comes from art. And so with Emily Jassier, an artist who's actually went to MCA for grad school,
Wow.
these pieces that she made in her work, and then also Joe Sacco's books, the graphic novels that he made about his time there during, I think, the first Intifada. And so, and then through books and podcasts, I mean, it really is one of those things that is so murky, so nuanced, and so complicated. I love that thing that you said about how you weren't a particularly nuanced 21-year-old. I think at 54, it's one of those things where I kind of say, listen, we can talk about this, but you need to give me an hour. We need to, like, this can't be an internet exchange. This can't be like a comment, you know. Now, I'm interested in terms of, because you mentioned that in terms of your connection to immigration, and you're looking at it through the Latin American lens. I mean, in the same way that Ta-Nehisi Coates, in the most recent book, this episode sponsored by The Message, where he talks about looking at it through the lens of civil rights and looking at it through the lens of a black man in America. To me, all of that seems really interesting too, in terms of how we frame it, how I frame it as a person in the world. Now, were there other things about which you were very passionate when you were an undergraduate?
It was also the Iraq War was starting. So I also was just getting, this was like a big split between my parents and myself for a minute, around like war. They were like, this was post 9/11 too. Like, it was a weird time. It was a really weird time. And so there was a lot of like, I do think that's where the politic I still hold today was really developed. It was against war, against imperialism, for people power, knowing the abundance within us. All that stuff are like kind of the foundation blocks for me. And I was lucky to be able to live through some of like that learning at a place like a college town in North Florida.
Right. Now, you were talking a little bit about the working with the Latin American studies as a minor, and then also the photography in the mix. I'm curious, back to the question about photography and some people that you were looking at or some people that you were thinking about that kind of helped you re-understand things, because I love how you talked about those images when you were a kid, and then now, of course, in hindsight, we recognize those as sort of this colonial colonization image. But I'm curious, how are you processing this? How are you thinking about this when you were in your late teens, early 20s?
So I, like going into junior year of college is when you start getting like into your sort of more intense classes, on both fronts, both journalism and Latin American studies. So that was an inflection point for me when I started really both fantasizing about the idea of leaving this country and going back and photographing. I thought in my head the best thing I could do for my people would be to go back to like Latin America and photograph conflict. I was feeling a lot of feelings. I wanted to do a lot, and I, felt very restrained by my place in life. And so there was a lot of fantasy that that was conjured up there. Like I would read about specific, militia groups in particular were of high interest to me. Hi, Homeland Security. But I just really was curious, and that made me get a little bit more intense about wanting to be a good photographer. So I also started working for the school paper, the Independent Florida Alligator, and was photographed there for a little bit, and then was photo editor for a while. And like all that was kind of this idea of like when I was going to leave, feeding this idea that when I was done with college, I was just going to move to like Bogota or something.
Right. And I love how you're just like, no, there's no way I'm going to move to Bogota.
Happen.
But no, so I mean, how was it one of those things where the the romantic idea of being a photojournalist in a war-torn or dangerous situation is way scarier in real life. Was it just that?
It just felt like I just felt so much urgency around illuminating like the stories of the people who were trying to be like exterminated. You know, I have had a long deep well of emotion for indigenous communities in the Andes. You see about like, you know, I stopped drinking Coca-Cola because of like all the water deals that they broker against people in their own on their own land. Um, yeah, it was like it just was. Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What was I
You
saying?
were thinking about sort of the romanticness of doing.
Yes. Oh, and I had also started reading Che Guevara's Motorcycle Diaries. So I was big on my so that and that was very much like a romantic weaving of a story of someone's like formative education ahead of like their lasting impact, you know. And so I was really inspired by him and that book in particular because he like you know describes basically talking to the people most affected directly and then using that to inform where he puts his action.
Now, were there people like, for me, in terms of thinking about school, and especially sort of later, there were a lot of people, a lot of other artists that I really admired, and I felt like there was a kind of kinship there, or at least a kind of admiration there. What about for you when you were at that point? What were some things that you were looking at and thinking about? I know you mentioned the Motorcycle Diaries. What were some other things that were sort of informing you as in your college years?
There's a photographer, a Brazilian photojournalist named Sebastião Salgado, and he is just an amazing photographer. Like just yeah, I'm getting like all like butterfly just thinking about like so by some luck, the University of Florida Art Museum was managed to get this beautiful exhibit of Sebastião Salgado's photographs from I think it's a book called Genesis, if I remember correctly, but it's all about workers. And I might be confusing two different books here, but this book is like all about workers in the like silver mines of of some part of Brazil, and the work is very striking, very gruesome. Still, like very much centers the workers as like the heroes in the image, but doesn't hold back in showing the conditions under which they labor. And like that to me was like this like visual revelation. You know, I was like, this is how you tell people. This is how you like tell people that something needs to change. You know, you just show it to them, and you show it to them like giving the dignity of the person who's most affected. Yeah, he was amazing, or he is amazing. He's still around, like replanting trees to like help reforest Brazil.
P.S. I love how you just dropped your like whole artist statement right there. It was just like how to center these images and these people and what they go through, and it was like this like little clip, and it was totally perfect.
Oh,
Now, and so thinking about that, I mean, obviously that was really impactful. One of the things I think about a lot when it comes to photojournalism is single images versus a series of images, especially after looking at your show at the Brooks. And then also looking at the things that you post on the machine, all of the way those sequences work. I'm curious, how was that Salgado show that you saw? Was some of that planted there as well?
I think that's right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about this before, so I'm thinking this out loud. But like, I think he like if I had to describe one photo from that show or from that body of work, I would struggle to do that, like in a precise way, because it really is like a body of work. One of my very good friends from one of my grad school experiences, who had seen me this Memphis work, for example, in a million ways, like was kind of clowning on me because he's like, all you do is photo essays, and you like don't do photo stories. And like stories have like a bit of like an arc sometimes that I feel like requires a resolution. And a lot of the things I'm attracted to don't tend to have resolution.
Right, which is why we're doing it.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the reason why. But yeah, additional, and like when I looked up to artists like him and Brenda Ann Keneally, who they like traffic in volume. It's like volume of images that allows you to understand something more deeply. I like that.
And then what about like in terms of thinking about your because it seems like you were in the photojournalism, there is a two-part to it. There is the making of the image, but then there's also the making of the image and how it pushes the story forward. How does it work? To me, that seems like a totally different part of your brain. How was that in terms of your navigating those two parts of your brain at the same time, click, 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 as you take these pictures?
Yeah. I think that I probably didn't get into editing I think I was really struggling through editing for a lot of those first years and didn't actually get serious about it until probably right before right going into grad school. I went to grad school at Ohio University a couple years after I graduated at the University of Florida. So and I think part of that was because of this like format I kind of just alluded to earlier about this like formulaic, like I took a photo essay class and like I remember there also being some level of formula there because it was like you start with like a strong opening picture and then you get a scene setter and then, I don't know, some like detail, some like wide photo. Yeah, like I remember there being like in the essay class, there was like this idea of like, this is how you do it. This is how you compose an essay. And that just is like, yeah, it's like trying to put Play-Doh, back in the jar. It's not really a great way to get things done.
And so you were doing this in college. For your senior year, was there a senior project or a senior thesis exhibition? How did it work for your program?
Yeah, there wasn't a individual thing. I ended up doing that class with that one John, that was called Florida Fly-ins, and we studied and went to Ecuador, to northern Ecuador, to like learn about life there or whatever. And so I did a story on guinea pig raising because it's a like food in Andean countries. And it's mostly women doing it because they can do it at home. So I did some like essay on the guinea pig cultivation process, and it was literally like pig from like raising to like a plate of fried. Like that's how they wanted me to do the story. It was like, here's a little guinea pig in its pen, and then like 8 images later, you see it on a plate.
Now, was that the first time that you had been back south of the border?
Yeah, I think it might have been. Yeah, because I'm so sorry. I went back when I was 17.
Okay.
I went back like 2000. 1999 to visit for the first time.
Okay. But now here you are. You're in this new country, or a country that you have not yet been. Talk to me a little bit about that process, because I would imagine there was something sort of surreal about it, and also something very meta about it in your brain, sort of going all at the same time.
Yeah.
What was that process like?
Yeah, I think like it was very exciting. I had one classmate whose father was also Peruvian, but the rest of the folks were pretty much white, or a pair of Asian homegirls were also with us there. But most everyone else was white. So I felt like a kind of way about being there on this kind of like gringo tour,
right?
At first, but I did what I did to do what I did, so there was like a little bit of tension there. Ultimately, like I think the greatest source of like strife. There was a source of strife, and it was around the fact that like this was a plan that was executed and designed by someone who worked in a certain way that was really kind of not aligned with who I am as a person, and gave me no space to be the like a person having like a real response to being in the Andes for the first time. I had been back to Lima, but I'd not been like in the mountains, and so this was like, I don't know. And so he set up these very weird, everybody had like a local contact, like a fixer that we were hiring and paying. We were the students and we're hiring and paying ourselves. And like this fixer was great, but he like it was a transaction, and so like I felt there was just something really heavy there for me. I asked him for like a favor or something toward the end, and he was like, "Well, you could pay me another day," and I was like, "That's fair," but I'm like, I felt like a kinship with him, and I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for how transactional and extractive of a trip that was. Actually, like, he had suggested, oh, you should if you want to take pictures of kids on the street, you could give them some candy. Like, no. No. First of all, kids don't need to be taking candy from no strangers.
Right. I mean, it sounds like, even very early on, you had an ethos that was sort of working against these common ideas that had been held for a long time. Was that something, the butting heads, was that something that was particularly common in that program, or just in general?
It was like an internal butting, because I wasn't, of course, bringing up anything to anyone. I was just holding it all inside. Bringing it up to anyone would be like, create an issue. I felt, and I'm not saying that I had the capacity for this discourse at that time, but I just don't think that there was any space for that kind of discourse without, especially just me not having the tools, from like a childhood of assimilation, and then like, yeah, and my early 20s being resentful. Like, it was just like a weird intersection for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
So now what happens after school?
So I made it through school fine. I didn't do horrible, but I feel like I didn't do great, and I was feeling pretty down on myself. And managed to get an internship at the last minute at this newspaper in South Florida, the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, which was at the time in 2007, it was a pretty big paper. But it was their Spanish publication. They used to have a weekly Spanish publication called El Sentinel. And El Sentinel hired me to be their photographer, and I would also work a couple days a week with the main newsroom. But it was in South Florida, which made it so I could stay with my parents. Then I would drive up to Broward and Palm Beach County. I put like 65,000 miles on my Jeep that year. Like, it was a lot of, it was a lot, but it was like my first time working, for real at a daily newspaper. And that was me putting myself in so many uncomfortable situations that I felt like I had no business being in. And
you mean just in terms of the stories that you were covering?
Yeah, and also just in terms of being a good enough photographer to actually like do the story correctly. I wasn't feeling like, I had a lot of help from friends who like gave me support, gave me pointers, but I felt very out of place. Although I ended up doing okay in that internship, I really enjoyed it. I grew a lot. I learned a lot. I was doing some news kind of in my backyard, which was really interesting to me. Miami is a super interesting place. And so I did that, and then it was like a series. I did another internship in Lima, Ohio, where I worked for a year. I like blasted out applications all over the country and wrote this kind of corny premise of a cover letter to the newsroom in Lima, Ohio, letting them know I was born in Lima, Peru. And I'm almost convinced that's the main reason that they hired me. They loved that. My portfolio was like pretty mediocre. I don't know. But there I really grew up a lot in terms of like my capacity as a photographer. Also, I was like in a very small community. I was in rural Northwest Ohio, and had no family, around. I had no clue what I was doing. but it was so fun. I like photographed high school volleyball and football and baseball and all these things, and then I would also photograph pancake breakfasts and like county fairs. Ugh. And it was just all this Americana stuff that I never grew up with. So I was like so interested, and I had so much fun like learning about it and trying to make interesting photos of it.
No, you said that, I mean, when you said you had this gig for a year, I learned a lot. I'm curious, what do you think it was about that that made you learn a lot? Was it just that you had matured in that internship and that you were kind of ready for something? Or was it something else?
I think it was probably like just getting a ton of experience. So like just the practice of showing up to a place and being like, okay, hi, I'm Andrea with the Lima News. Can I take your picture? And then because the rejection is like, the thing I live to avoid. So, but you get rejected a lot as like a community journalist, and so I still to this day will avoid it to all ends, but like I know now, like how to handle it. And I feel like that being there helped me be, yeah, confident and definitely accountable to the community, because we would cover something, it would publish in the newspaper, and then community would be like, hey, this is, you didn't get this right, or why do you see this way? You had to be in conversation because it was a small town. And I realized like there also just like that sort of kind of deepened a sense of purpose around the work, because I was like, oh, I'm actually doing this to serve this community, not just to be like a badass photographer, not just to wait out my days till I can move to Bogota.
Now, do you think it was also that you were in this strange place that you were totally like before when you were in South Florida? It was kind of familiar, or you kind of had some connections there. Do you think it was also that you were just in this weird place in Ohio?
I
mean,
think that's probably likely.
I'm sure it's a great place. I'm not saying
No, it's super weird.
Yeah.
No, it is like the tank plant is like I think the biggest employer in Allen County, Ohio.
No, I don't know anything about this place. Is there a large Latinx population? Were you like a sore thumb sticking out in terms of
a bit? Yeah, a bit.
Yeah.
I was like a much younger woman also, so like, yeah, like being a woman in a lot of like spaces where you're working isn't like as a journalist is also, yeah, a small woman. I don't know. It was hard. Like I think the intersection of both, obviously, like my how my race presents, and my gender, like, but at the same time, like what you were saying earlier, it was so different that I was like basically like at Disney World. I was like I saw like my sister and I drove into Lima. She helped me move from Miami, and there was a guy riding his lawnmower, and we were like, what is this? And I moved in with some guys into some farmhouse that was like in a neighboring little suburb, and they took us tailgating our first weekend. That I hadn't done that before.
Right.
For a high school football game.
No, I mean, I would imagine that there's a part of you, because you're so thoughtful and so aware of the meta environment, like there must have been a part of you that was like keeping yourself in check in terms of thinking about you as being a person from away and being in this new environment, and then also keeping in mind all of the things that you had learned from, the John and the National Geographic way of seeing. Was that something that you had to sort of be aware of and think about as you were sort of doing this process of photographing this strange new world?
Yeah. It was so. Yeah, it was a largely white community. There was some in town, because we also covered a bunch of rural communities around Lima proper. But in town, there was like a kind of like it's like it was a significant Black population, stuff that connects us all up and down this chain, all the Great Migration folks who had ties to back here once upon a time. And so I would try to like go to like, and of course it's the town totally segregated, so I would try to do like my feature every every third day I'd have to just go find a community photo, and I would try to do that in the community spaces that weren't typically represented. Just to it would usually be like a picture of like kids playing or like, parents doing something with it, like something really kind of fluffy, but something that like just puts a little bit of like sunshine on part of the community that could use it. That's how I would try to like split my time.
Now, I'm curious too. I mean, in part because I just have no idea. What is the daily life of a photojournalist? I would imagine that it's sort of all over the place and it isn't very predictable.
Right.
What does it usually look like? I mean, in terms of being there in Lima, Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was in Lima, and then I also had another similar kind of community journalist job in New Hampshire a few years later. I worked there for almost 4 years in Concord, New Hampshire. And both were very similar gigs. One, I was on staff versus being an intern, so there was like a little bit of a difference. But in terms of the day-to-day, you have like a shift, and then you either start at the newsroom or more often than not, you start driving around trying to find a photo to slip into the front part of local. Like we always had like these empty visual holes in the newspaper layout process that people would be like, go find a picture. And nobody loved it. Of course, we put a bunch of time and effort and love into it. But like when you brought it back to the newsroom, they're like, okay, whatever. So just slide it into the hole. So that would be part of what we would do. If you had a night shift, you would be doing high school sports. Both of those newspapers and jobs required me photographing a lot of high school sports, which never wanted to do it, but had a lot of fun doing it because it's not like a regular sports event. It's a community event, And a lot of towns that are rural, those are like big community events. And so it was like these kind of like cool events that you could like, I would spend so much time photographing marching bands and like student sections and like concession stands. And I'd try to photograph some sports along the way because sports like needed a little ball pow photo. But I would like really love just like getting to like finding like your best friend who's going to be like your best friend every time you come to this gym, some like supervisor or teacher or whatever, or chaperone rather. Yeah, I really liked that. So yeah, we were out in the community a lot. We would be working with with reporters, depending on what was going on. And then more often than not, you would, if you had a night shift, you'd be doing sports.
And I'm interested too. I mean, it seems like there's a kind of investment that you as a journalist, photographer, make in a space. And so like, say for example, like when you were doing that internship, I would imagine that it was sort of finite, in terms of your bandwidth, in terms of how much you were invested, in the same way that like if you know that you're only going to be around somebody for a couple of months, you're not going to really invest a lot emotionally into a space. I'm curious, what was that like in terms of being there in Ohio? Did you know that it was going to be a finite gig?
Yeah. It had been extended once because initially it was just a 6-month gig, and then it turned into a year because they, I guess, just wanted to keep me on instead of finding another intern. But I, at that point, had decided to go to grad school because I thought that, like, I mean, this was 2007, 2008. 2008, there's a little bit of a crisis in the economy. And so being like a 22-year-old, like, aspiring journalist was like a weird time. And so I did what many unsuspecting person has done and gone to grad school to try to figure it out. And I don't regret it, but it was like the student loan debt is like literally holding a knife to my neck now. So
now, where did you end up going?
I went to Ohio University.
Okay. Now, how did you decide to go to, and are we supposed to say the Ohio University?
No, that's Ohio
that's
State.
The other one. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
Don't.
Yeah. Well, I went to school at Iowa, and people would always ask me how Ohio was, and I'd be like, no, it's the other 75 percentile state. So, okay, so you're there. How did you decide on that program?
While I was in Lima, I got into this like very revered program called the Eddie Adams Workshop. It's named after this legendary news photographer who made photographs during the war on Vietnam, the Vietnam War, and particularly, and maybe this is a photograph you've seen before, but it's the photograph with the guy who's about to get executed. So he like all like old white photojournalists from that era, of course, made a career of being a news photographer, and at some point took his, what he'd earned up to his farm in upstate New York, and then turned it into this like annual workshop, and it was like very selective. I've like anyone in photojournalism has already had like 2 or 3 ulcers about trying to get into this stupid thing, and my unprepared self, of course, showed up to it in 2007, where I was like, I don't know how I got in here.
Now wait, was it a thing that you applied for?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't like a surprise. It wasn't like someone said, "Hey, you're going to go do this."
No, I had
so you got into this. How long was this workshop?
It was just a few days, but
Okay.
it's like you were in the barn. They call it, barnstorm. You're at the barn with like 100 other photographers that were also selected, and then all the photographers are in teams with some of like the best editors in the country, some of like the most revered photographers in the country. It's like this big cool guy photography reunion with this workshop within it. It's a big social scene. And yeah, I just applied to it because this is like what we were supposed to do at that point in our career. And I got in. So while I was there, I ended up meeting a lot of folks who were going to Ohio University, because that program back then had an extremely strong visual communications program. They had a lot of very successful photographers come out of there. And these people were so nice to me, because Midwesterners.
That's how we do it.
They were so sweet, and like invited me to come to Athens one night and spend some time getting to know it there. So I was like, wow, this is like, while I was at Florida, I had found my cohort of photographers toward the end, after like going into the student paper and many years of crying by myself. This was like already built in so strong at Ohio. There was such a big and lovely culture of people who just really wanted to make great photos. So that's how I ended up there.
I mean, to me, that sounds really powerful. Tell me a little bit more about this workshop. I mean, to me, that sounds like it was one sort of a gateway into this new area of your life, but it also sounds like it might have been really important in terms of thinking about how photography worked for you. You want to stick there just for a minute?
Sure, yeah. I think that's like maybe that workshop, I think, was part of like recognizing that there was like this different level of editing, part of that change that we were talking about earlier, from like when I was thinking about like it's image 1, 2, 3, and 4 versus like a body of work. I did, they assigned you stories, and some people had like awesome stories, and some people had spend a couple days with like this family that runs an egg farm, which is what I did. And I did. And they were encouraging you, like, stay with them from sun up till sundown. Like, they wanted you, the idea is that you would go so hard because they gave an award at the end. And so in this sense, it also did influence me in like a negative way, because it was like such like exposure to like a competitive, ego-driven version of both success and impact. There's like, they give out like a handful of awards at the end, including one like significant, I think it's like $10,000 and like a bunch of equipment, like, I don't think that's what they do anymore, but back then it was like this big, and so someone gets that big award, and then a bunch of other people get like these other kind of like awards that, like, I don't know. And I didn't get any awards. I also got told to move by, what is that fucker's name? Vincent LaFleur. Eat ass, bitch. He, I'm sorry, I should have cussed on an oral history. Vincent LaFleur. He sucks so bad. This guy was like one of these like kind of straddling on editorial and commercial photographers. And we'd take a big group photo at some point in the workshop with like everyone that's present, in front of the barn. And I was just standing there, and then like the director of photography for the New York Times, who's also a short person, stands next to me. And so I was just like, I'm going to be in the photo next to Michelle McNally. And like Vincent LaFleur like tapped me and he's like, can you move so I can stand next to Michelle? And I like did, which is a crazy thing. But it's also a crazy question to hoist upon someone who has significantly less power than you. So yeah, there was a lot of those dynamics of like cliquishness. There was like way too much alcohol at the end. Like that has been something that they've reformed a bit since then. But people were getting plastered. At one point, I was wearing this stupid American Apparel dress that like created some like wardrobe malfunction situation, and I don't know how long I was exposed, but like it wasn't until like a friend was like, girl, and I think that a bunch of people saw and didn't say anything, you know. Yeah, so it was like, it was good. It was a big pill to swallow, all of it.
I mean, it sounds like you were exposed to both the really exciting part and then also the really horrible part, like in the way that I say Costco is everything good about America and everything bad about America at the same time. It sounds like you were sort of exposed to that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Now, I would imagine for some people that would be a thing where you would say, this is not for me. But it sounds like this moment was particularly strong in terms of moving you towards grad school. Now, when you ended up going to Ohio, what was that program like? And first of all, what was the name of the program?
It's the Ohio University Visual Communications program.
Okay.
And
is it an MFA or just a?
It was an MA.
MA, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't really know the difference between an MFA and an MA back then, you know. And I thought because journalism to me in my head was a trade, that there wouldn't be an MFA. I have more to bitch about that later, but. Yeah, Ohio University, is in, well, you don't know, but it's in Southeast Ohio in Appalachian foothills. It's very beautiful there. I just went and visited there a few weeks ago, and I just, like, every time I'm there, I'm like, God, I could live here in a second. The hills are beautiful. It's just lush. Yeah, people are very sweet there. I was very attracted to like the level of documentary that they were doing, because it was kind of like community based. Like it was a lot of students photographing the area around the university in these ways that felt like what I really enjoyed doing at newspapers, but also codifying it in this like larger body of work kind of way that I thought was really impressive. And had folks who had, the National Geographic contacts all in the mix. Pete Souza, who was Obama's photographer, was teaching at the program. This was, Obama got elected in 2008, which was my first year of grad school. So he only was there for one semester. Then he left to go be the president's photographer. But like all that was very attractive. It was like the combination of both success and like something that felt attainable. Like I can go and make photos of people in community. That's what I've been doing in Lima. Like I think I can do this here. Like this doesn't seem intimidating. My class, the cohort I started with was almost all women except for 2 dudes. And I think that all of us have like low-level trauma from that time. Like it was just very competitive, and you had a bunch of perfectionist women who were extremely hard on themselves, just trying really hard to please our professors. And it was like a losing battle. I think there was just a different style of like feedback and rapport back then, of one that I don't miss at all. I really struggled through, it felt a lot like undergrad again when I was having like panic attacks at crits. I felt like I never was good enough. I was always putting myself in comparison to people. And it was myself, and there was another girl who was half Peruvian, half Dominican. And then it was all white folks. It was a largely white program. There was a couple people of color in the mix, but largely white. And on faculty, there was only one black person, mostly white dudes otherwise. Yeah, and the one woman on staff, she was a total badass, but she's like, you got to carry a knife, if you want to be a photographer and a woman. And I'm like, okay, it's dangerous. Right. this is dangerous.
Like literally carry a knife,
Yeah.
not the proverbial knife.
No.
Yeah. Now, thinking about that, I mean, again, the things I know about an MA program is it doesn't even fit in a thimble. How long is the program?
It was 2 years, but I fell in love with someone and stayed for 3.
Okay. And so it's 2 years. And what does the coursework look like for that master's?
Yeah, it was, we were on a quarter system still, so it was 3 different quarters. I was doing first semester was very basic, but then you got into I got into film editing, a film editing class that also really helped me a lot with sequencing and editing, like a lot. I still think about a lot of what I learned in that class today. I spent 2 years studying Adobe Flash for some dumb reason. Like they were saying it was what was going to be next. Built a lot of Flash websites that are extinct now. I also did some studio work, which I'm still like, I feel comfortable in the studio, but it's still like, people can do so much in studio, and that was an interesting thing to experiment with. The biggest classes for me were like the essay type classes. So I took like a photo essay class, which is where I photographed the youth in this one community outside of Athens. It's a town named Gloucester, Ohio, and it had been photographed a lot because it experiences a lot of poverty, and people, I don't know what the precise good phrasing for this is, but like poor folks like are just more accessible to folks with cameras in some ways. Like not because there's no value there. There's just like I don't know, like I feel like folks who are in need will respond to feeling seen in ways that might not be for their best interest all the time. And in Gloucester, there was like, I don't know, there was just a lot of existing work that came out of my department that had not done like any kind of like libelous representation, but it had given like given the town, and the town itself carried this like brutal reputation for being a town full of people who are addicted to opiates, for kids who fight, who don't appreciate their education, who they're like dirty. There was a lot of this like the surface and material reality of people who are living and surviving in poverty can overtake an image, right? And so there was something about that made me want to dig a little bit further. Not that I thought I could do better, because I feel like it's hard to shake off a lot of the things that draw us to making those images, but something I think maybe I was trying to challenge myself. I don't know.
Now, I'm curious. So as you begin a project, so like obviously it's a part of this photo essay class. How do you, when you begin, how do you frame going out and doing something? I mean, obviously sometimes there might be parameters in terms of a class assignment or in terms of a gig. They're asking you to do X, Y, and Z. But I'm curious, it sounds like with this project, you had some open terrain.
Yeah.
So you go and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. Talk me through that process.
Yeah. I was very nervous about that because my aforementioned rejection sensitivity and the fact that I also wanted to do this. I wanted to focus on youth, knowing also that youth are deeply vulnerable, and I don't want to encourage people to trust in ways that they shouldn't. Even though my intentions are good, like they don't know that, and it might be good to like encourage people to be like, don't let a stranger take your photos, And so I was trying to measure all that. And so I went into town and I just started walking around and met some folks. Talked to any kind of like parents around and explained what I was doing and why I was trying to do it. Like referencing the fact that I know that like a bunch of folks from my same program have come through here and done things that don't make people feel good. And was able, like in a way too easy of a way to get connected to some families that were really great, really shared. Like I would just go and visit Gloucester probably 4 to 5 times a week. Go there between classes on the weekends. I also met there this person who is like at the center of like the longest work I'll ever do. I'm hoping we're gonna do it for our entire lives. But I met a young woman then that I still photograph today. Her name is Jameska, but she was just like on the street, like chain smoking cigarettes with her bestie, you know. And I was like, "Where's your mom?" Or I actually thought she was an adult because she's much taller than I am. And so when I found out she was a kid, I was like, "So where's your mom?" And her mom and I are very friendly. Yeah. So having that connection, she's part of a big family in town also. Like their McKee family runs deep in Athens County, and yeah, so like that helped me sort of like really be and like merge into their community. And what that also required, I think part of like the big thing is like trying to learn what transparency can be in the process, right? Because like this is like sometimes to my own detriment, but I try not to be too precious with my camera, right? You don't come in with, unless it's like, you know, very specific circumstances, yes, but you don't walk in and just start photographing. You have to like build rapport, talk about intentions, and then I always try to make my camera accessible to the person so they could see what I'm photographing. Yeah, and also like the kids themselves, like they loved photographing just like I did when I was a kid, loved photographing themselves and their friends. So I would let them play with the camera, which was school property. But then I would print them out at like CVS and bring them back. And they were like, at one point, Jameska had her whole wall in her bedroom, like ceiling to floor, with like 4x6s that I had printed out for her of like just like the last year of stuff we had done together. It was really cool.
Now, just let's stick there for a second. So, what was it about this young person that drew you to them?
I don't know. It's like it's really hard to say. I was just trying to put myself out there. I had no expectations, but like her and I have gotten along so well for so long. I love her. I have big feelings right now too. She just got married a few weeks ago, so I went to photograph her wedding and spend some time. So I'm like very big in my feelings about her right now. But she's just, I don't know. She was an only child. When we met, her father had passed in this kind of like tragic accident right before we met. And so we hit it off right away, but we didn't hang out for a minute until like, she was kind of until she went through some grief processing. And I think her mom was also going through so she just was alone basically. And like I ended up being like a safe person for her to hang out with a lot, you know, like I would give her rides to school, to the Walmart in Athens, you know, bring home some food from the Dairy Queen, you know. So I tried to, the notion that like extraction had hit that community so hard was not ever in my head, was always in my head rather. Was always the community had been so extracted from it. Also been like a coal community, so like there was still coal mining trains that are passing through the town carrying all of its nasty shit, but no one is like working for this thing. They just have to deal with like that anyway. So I tried my best to counteract that extraction in ways that were both I think meaningful to her, but also prove that like not only was I a safe person to her, but she was also a really safe person to me. You know, because I basically existed with no boundaries because I was asking her also to some degree to let me photograph her without much boundary, right? Like, and so, yeah, so sometimes like that, I feel like that when I've been this way in times after this Jameska experience, I see that you can't be that way with everyone, you know, that can come at a serious personal cost also. But she has been an incredible friend to me now. Like we have 10 years between us, so she's 2 years younger than my youngest sister. And I love my youngest sister to death, but like me and her don't even have this much of a, you know, relationship as Jameska and I do. And I think, yeah, part of it is that she's an only child. She like has worked really hard to get out of her situation, and I see that and I honor that and I relate to that. She's done it mostly on her own. She has such a big heart and she cares. She's like the kind of kid that had like a new kitten like every 3 weeks, you know, because there was just like some kitten that needed help. So, yeah.
I mean, to me, I'm always really curious about that. I mean, in some ways, because that way of working is so different from mine, but also like thinking about different photographers and the people that they are attracted to or drawn to, especially ones that they work with for a long time. Like I'm thinking about that really beautiful series that Reneke Dijkstra did with Almarija, the girl that was the immigrant to the Netherlands, and she photographed her every year. And so like when I saw that piece when it was installed like in 2018, and then not too long ago I saw some images that had been made since then, you know, like that kind of thing. And usually they're sort of in the same pose, but I'm curious like how for some people it clicks and for how other people it doesn't. But I'm also interested like in the way that you were talking earlier about your fixer in Ecuador, like the what's it called? Like it was like a thing where you're being paid. You know, it was like a job. But here, this is totally different. But at first, it almost begins that way. I'm curious how that works in terms of, like you were saying, there's more of a personal investment, and your heart is really in it now. I'm super interested in that in terms of what it was about her and her story. I mean, you covered it a little bit, but I'm curious how that's grown and how that's changed over the years.
Yeah. Well, she's definitely more responsible than I am at this point, which I appreciate. Because I was worried for her for a minute. But yeah, I think that we just like, I've always felt slightly arrested in my development around certain things, you know, around life in particular, just because I never had like an explicit guidebook for how to do things. And I learned more through mistake than I do through like just, innate knowledge. But she like, yeah, she's just been like she felt like a sister to me like very early on, you know, for her to share with me parts of her feelings that were so big and so personal. And she was doing that in the way that like someone who yearns to be loved does. You know, she was a teenage girl, so a lot of like what I was attracted to those first years actually was like her pursuit of love and how she treated love. And like made a little short film about her going to prom, and I loved it. Because it was so much like related to like my own feelings and thoughts and processing of things about like why I do the things that I do. You know, what is it that, here's what I'm doing, but what is it that is actually driving me, you know? And I think for her, love has always been at the center of it, you know, in a way that is like very palpable between us in our conversations. So she talks to me, she'll call me still about like boy drama. Luckily, she just got married to a very nice guy. But and the other thing she does, and I like, I'm always here to do, but I do not relate to. She loves to budget out loud with me. You know, and so I recognize that she sees me as someone that like she can trust with certain feelings and thought streams and things, like, and that is not something I wouldn't turn it down lightly. But I also just like, how do you not engage and match that, and like, how, I don't know, I'm so lucky. I'm so like, I love her so much.
Now, when you were doing the projects in grad school, I mean, obviously part of it is assignment, and then part of it is probably independent study in terms of you kind of doing your own thing. Talk to me a little bit about when you're in charge. You know, I mean, I know that all journalism has a kind of mandate, but talk to me a little bit about when you're in charge. Like, how do you find the thing that's important?
You mean in charge of like what I might do next?
Yeah, of your path. Yeah, of the thing that you go out and shoot.
Yeah, I just turned 40 this year. I'm a little bit at this inflection point of just like recognizing that like photography has done many life-saving things for me, and I had to fight to get access for it and to stay in it. And so I'm really interested in like creating like removing those barriers more, you know. And I think part of that, like me being a photojournalist still is like a little bit crazy, and I'm low-key still kind of paying to do my job, mostly because of like debt and how things work. But at the same time, like I wouldn't have chosen any other path. Like I fucking love my job so much, and it makes me, there's a lot of things to be scared about in this world. It makes me way less scared to have like studied the world, seen the world, processed the world through a camera. I feel like that we have what we need to make our lives better. And there's something really reassuring, really self-possessing. Narratives are also very powerful. There's a story I always share about here in Memphis, like after Ernest Withers went down to Birmingham to document the Montgomery bus strikes. Him and his reporting colleague sent back their story and their images to the Tri-State Defender up here. And that next morning, that paper that published was sold out immediately, but it wasn't sold out because people were so ready to read the news. It was because a bunch of like racists hated this story and had bought all the copies of the Tri-State Defender to sink them in the river, you know? And so like, and there's that Zora Neale Hurston quote about like, if you don't tell your story, you know, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. So there was something to me that's very important for all of us to believe that we are able to tell our own story. And so like, I sometimes try to do that in my own, I try to do that mostly like externally to try to create space and push certain notions and standards to the side so that we can make more room for people to have access to this. But I still struggle personally with my own ability to like tell my own story. And so I think right now choosing my own path looks like trying to like reclaim some self-narrative. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I think I like have all of these skills that I've developed as a photographer, as a visual storyteller, and I see the world as this through that lens. So I'm trying to find the way to put the pieces together and try to create more personal work, because in addition to like whatever like professional success, quote unquote, I've like achieved that might help people see, oh, like I can do this. I also want people to be like, I can do this while being my whole self.
I like that. And then let me see how we're doing. I think we're doing okay. Yeah, we got about 10 minutes. So you finished with grad school. Well, wait, grad school. Were there some things that you would like to flesh out, put on the record, in terms of awesomeness and goodness, in terms of that experience?
Yes. It was I had a very good cohort. I fell in love with a very nice man. He is what brought me to Memphis, because he was also a photojournalist and he worked at the Commercial Appeal for a minute. So going to Ohio was also just like wildly, like important in how life shaped out. Like it was definitely a challenge, you know, around like the questions of like meritocracy and professionalism and access and privilege and all these things. But at the same time, I got a lot of support that I had never experienced before. I got right after my third year, I got an internship with the New York Times and went to New York and was like a photographer there for a summer. And that was very exciting, you know, and like in retrospect, it's like cool to mention. It was obviously like totally nerve-wracking the whole time, but there was no way I would have applied to that had it not been for friends pushing me to do it. Because like my teachers were a little bit like, well, you should think about applying to this other little community newspaper in Texarkana. Like I feel like the message I was receiving was not, my potential was not New York Times, you know? Yeah. So I felt a lot more self-assured by being able to do this work deeply in both community with my cohort and community with the folks in Gloucester. And that just has kept like sort of underlining the fact that I just really love doing this work in service of community.
And now, who was this teacher that told you to carry a knife?
Marcy Nicewander.
Now, was this someone that you worked with closely?
She'd been around at the university for years. She'd taught so many of like the people that, I looked up to. And she's the first, she was a lot in our first year. She was like the intro, the small systems lighting person. She was also, I think, one of like the first women photographers at the White House back in like the first Clinton presidency. So she she worked for the Associated Press. Yeah. So she in that sense like represented this like, because like I said, it was pretty much all men except for her. And she like represented this like idea of like, this is like the exceptionalism you have to attain. These are the rules you have to play by. And to me, like, even though I think it was well intentioned and honestly something I probably kind of needed to hear, the knife thing was a little bit like, we're not asking people to act right. We're just asking us ladies to stay ready. Right. So I was a little disappointed and frustrated by that. But
also, what a badass thing to say.
It is.
I mean, in terms of like carrying a knife, I mean, that sounds really great. But also, it sounds like it's from experience.
Yes.
And also, obviously, right, we're not telling everybody else to not make us carry knives. We're making us carry knives. And that makes perfect sense, too. And I mean, for me, one of the things that was really great about grad school were the really close connections that I had with teachers and then also with my cohort. And then oral history time. Anything you want to throw on the document for that?
Yeah. I mean, like the cohort, I ended up that extra year I stayed, kind of connecting me closer to the cohort with my ex-partner, whose name is Brad Vess, and he's a great photojournalist, still in here in Memphis, and I ended up kind of like merging into Brad's cohort, and those are still some of my closest pals to this day. I'm like very grateful for, and some of them have like stayed hardcore in photojournalism. Like I have one of the homies is like total conflict photographer, has like been to Syria, Afghanistan multiple times. Like couldn't be me now. Give me a parade these days. Yeah, but so there's him, and then like another person who's done more of like this cool art, slower process stuff, and then two of the homies have just been like building a flower farm and starting to learn how to forge metal, and they're doing both really great at that, and that's so cool. Another homie's at the LA Times, but the LA Times is struggling. Yeah.
Now, when you finished with school, that's a massive shift. Was this when you had that internship at the New York Times?
Mm-hmm.
Give me a little bit on that.
Yeah, that was very exciting. I had always wanted to live in New York, and I learned very quickly after being there that I was like never prepared for New York, actually. It's so expensive. And I love food so much. I honestly blew so much money on food. That was really my big spend. But yeah, I worked every day at the New York Times. I went down to the building every day. There was 45 photo editors, and granted, the last newsroom I'd worked in had a guy named Craig. So this was a big change. I wasn't sure how to stand out. I was very nervous. The newsroom, even though New York is a very diverse city and it tends to be a diverse newsroom, the photo department was a little less diverse. I felt like I wasn't really, I wasn't sure what to do there. I was a little bit out of my depth, but I made a bunch of photos that I'm actually still kind of proud of, and made some connections that helped me for when I moved here to Memphis to start freelancing.
All right, so as a totally dumb question, you said you made some photos that you were really proud of. Talk to me about some of those photos, or talk to me about one of those photos, because I'm interested for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is obviously there's the quantity of photography and the speed of it, and then the selection of the ones, the editing, the ones that are really powerful, or the ones that fit into a story. Like you were saying about the one of the 7 things. Talk to me about one of those images and what it is about that sticks in your head. So like when you said, I have a few that I'm really proud of, I'm sure that floating above your head there is an image of that. So talk to me about one of those.
Yeah, so I had a couple of like longer assignments that I was lucky to catch. One of them was like a business story on sleepaway camps. And so it was like this very kind of business oriented reporting about sleepaway camp, but I basically got to stay at the sleepaway camp for 2 nights, and it was so fun. And there's photos, that from that like, one in particular was one that like there was a lot of things to worry about there. There was some kids that you couldn't photograph. There were some kids you could. There was like stuff going on at all ends of the camp at all times. But like at one point I got to like inside of a bunk, and it was like the bunk's like pre-sleep ritual, and they were doing this like dance and cool thing, and some of these kids could not be photographed. So I had to photograph around them. And I just remember making this photo that still felt, it was like tapping into this like tender femness that I was like really into at that time, after spending all that time with Jameska and just trying to remain a woman in the industry, like the tender femness being seen and consecrated. Because like the girls were all like brushing their hair, in their jammies, and there was just like a photograph of some of the girls that are from behind, but you could see like their hair's kind of like touching, and I don't know, just that closeness that you get. Coziness. And so I like that photo, not because of it. It's obviously has not changed the world. I hate to report it has not changed the world, but it just felt good. You know what I mean? I look at that photo and I'm like, I would still post this on my web. Like, I would post that work on my website, because I do feel like that photo and the collection that surrounds it did a really good job at just explaining this like kind of excitement of like youth, which is also something, like a motif I was like really into. Yeah, it felt good to spend that much time and resources and get that much backing doing and producing that kind of thing.
It must be really interesting. I mean, one of the ways I approach the things that you're talking about are through like This American Life, and how like Ira will talk about like going and covering high school kids and when he was really young, and that kind of interaction and that sort of bleed between themselves and the world. I mean, to me, all of that seems really interesting. I really appreciate you talking to me about it and sharing some of that with me. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Hamlet.
And that was the first of 2 interviews that we recorded with Andrea Morales. The interview that you just listened to was recorded on March 19th, 2025. Please join us next week when we will have the second of 2 interviews we recorded with Andrea. Until then, thank you for listening.